4-0 sure looks pretty, but maybe not every aspect of the 4-0 through the 4 weeks of play for Michigan football as they dove into Big Ten play and got by Rutgers 20-13. We got Justin Rowe on the line from Blue by 90 podcast. Of course, join Justin right there. How's it going today?
It's going well. I just said we're in like perfect fall weather here. This is like actual football weather, right? You've got some crisp air out there, but I enjoy this time of the year for sure. And so I'll start off with some very deep analysis that I have for you here, and that is 4-0 is better than 3-1. So I know that's hard to grasp for a lot of people, but I'll throw that out there.
Justin, we're going to send you to Vegas because is 4-0 better than 1-2?
4-0
is definitely, according to Vegas, not better than 1-2. I believe those Badgers are a favorite.
They are. Well, they started as a favorite. I actually looked at the Barstool Sportsbook this morning, and it had already swung from -1.5 Wisconsin to -1.5 Michigan. So a lot of movement there. I'm really intrigued by that line just in general because obviously people think that Wisconsin's not great, due to what happened on Saturday in the past 3 weeks. But you look at what Michigan has done on the road, specifically in Madison, but also just on the road against any decent team under Jim Harbaugh, and it's not gone well. So I don't know. I think there are a lot of bettors out there. I'm surprised that it moved towards Michigan is what I would say there.
Yeah, we'll get to the matchup with Wisconsin. I think it's very easy to take either side and see why that team would be the favorite. Of course, Michigan's winning the games. They're very similar teams in their approaches. Wisconsin's losing games, but I think it's understandable, and people still know that it's Wisconsin football, and they're good. They just have some issues to clean up. When I look at the Rutgers game, it was basically as though these teams switched uniforms at halftime. Michigan dominated the first half, but couldn't run away from Rutgers. Rutgers was just stout enough on defense to keep holding up the one big pass play for the touchdown. But besides that, held up well against Michigan, but the Wolverines dominating on the stat sheet. Second half, I was astounded, and I was in and out of this game, but I was astounded at the numbers that Rutgers put up from a standpoint of yardage and first down advantage in the second half. But again, they didn't have enough to make the dynamic plays to turn it in their favor.
You're right. It was pretty astonishing. And I've described it I was in the stands watching the game, and the fans of Michigan they were into it all game, but they were annoyed in the second half that they had to be into it. And I think that's how I felt as well. It was like, what happened in the first half? They went into halftime. It was almost as if Josh Gaddis, the offensive coordinator for Michigan, fell asleep and was like, we don't need to do anything. We'll be good. Let's run the clock out for an entire half. If you want to do that for the last 5 minutes, last 8 minutes, sure. When you're up by 3 scores, that's great. But you're up by 3 scores at halftime against a Big Ten opponent who's 3-0 under Greg Schiano, who's a great coach. They're not just going to roll over. This is not Rutgers of old. It really isn't. And so I think they're a decent team still, but I think Michigan still should have won. They probably should have covered the spread of 20.5 or whatever it ended up at. And so it was just very odd because, like you said, in the first half, they looked like they picked up where they left off from last week against Northern Illinois. And then in the second half, it was run up the gut, make a bad throw, 3-0. 4 or 5 straight times, and then all of a sudden it's a 1-score game, and everyone's like, what happened here?
We got the answer to our question in regards to, can anybody stop the Michigan running game? I don't know that they stopped the Michigan running game, but they did for a relatively large period of time. I guess the entire second half they did. So what was Michigan going to do to counter? Well, what Michigan did to counter was bleed the clock and play good enough defense. They didn't counter the way people would want them to in terms of turning to a passing game. They could light up a defense.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is that I think we had talked about it on here, but everyone was wondering, all right, when you go against Big Ten opponents, I think most people thought it was going to be this upcoming week against Wisconsin. Their defensive line in front 8 that we would see, all right, what's going to happen when somebody stops the run? But It happened a week prior, which I think ultimately is going to end up as a good thing for Michigan because they have to sound the alarms all week prepping for Wisconsin. But going back to the Rutgers game, I definitely agree. You would have hoped to see Josh Gaddis go to that creativity that we had talked about, that we had seen spurts of from this Michigan offense, where they throw the ball downfield, they get the ball to their weapons in space, they get it to Blake Corum around the edge. And we saw that there were a couple times at the end of the fourth quarter when they needed to put it away that they did get it to their guys. And all of a sudden it was like, holy cow, that worked. Why haven't we been doing that? It turns out when Greg Schiano stacks 8, 9 in the box, you can't run it with Blake Corum up the middle. And so, I mean, I think looking at Cade McNamara's numbers, it's really frustrating. I don't want to blame Cade McNamara for this game. I think there are a lot of people out here calling for JJ McCarthy. Now, Cade he made his mistakes for sure. He had a few really bad throws. He also had a few really good throws. And I don't think I would rather blame it, I think, on the play calling and not putting him in a position for success rather than putting this whole second half on Cade McNamara's shoulders. But ultimately, 9 for 16, 163 yards is not good. And you're going to need to throw the ball at some point. And I think the more frustrating thing for myself is only one completion in the second half. That's a problem. You can't do that no matter who you're playing against for Cade McNamara. And then the other thing is not one player on Michigan's offense had more than 2 catches. You have to get the ball to your weapons. I like spreading the ball around, I do, but I mean, when you have guys like Cornelius Johnson, Eric All is a mismatch nightmare for a lot of linebackers and safeties out there. Get him the ball. And so that's what was more frustrating when when the run game isn't working, but you still give it to Blake Corum 21 times and not try to get it to some other weapons where you have them all over the offense. That's what was more frustrating watching on Saturday.
Yeah, there's a balance to it. Every team should have playmakers that are the primary guys, but you don't want one guy catching the ball. I can think of particular teams that had one guy catching 85 passes and the next guy had 18. That's not necessarily the best route to go and typically not going to get it done. Right. But you have guys that are the go-to guys. They should be the best players that are getting their hands on the ball more than twice, you would think, in a 20-13 game. So, Justin, basically, if we stay on the offensive side, based on what was stated after the game, and of course, we're too early to hear what Jim Harbaugh is saying in his weekly news conference about it, just in regards to what the explanation was for not running the football well.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting what Jim wants to say here and what Josh Gaddis will say as well. But I think that this offensive line didn't play as well as they have in the past few games. And so you have to understand, when you rely on an offensive line to create holes time after time after time, after 4 games, you're going to find some plays where they don't, block as well. I also think this was one of the worst games from a running back read standpoint as well. There were a lot of holes that were there that the running backs just didn't read the right guy, or they didn't go off the butt of their blocker. And so I don't want to put it on either one there, but I think it's a shared blame of this offensive line and the running backs there, where, there were certain holes. They weren't as wide as we've seen in the past 3 games, but they were there and they just took a cut a wrong way. I saw multiple times there on a 3rd and 1 or a 2nd and 2 or something like that, which put Michigan in those holes. Now, that's what scares a lot of people, myself included, when you're about to go up against a Wisconsin team who's going to have a much better defensive front than Rutgers. You're not going to be able to push those guys around, as much. So you need to be creative and make holes. But if you can't make those holes, go back to that creativity. You have Blake Corum, who he can get to the edge and turn it upfield. Let him do that. They had to, they were using AJ Henning in that speed sweep option a lot as well, and we didn't see that, and so I think that part is frustrating that you didn't have those guys involved. I'll also say this. they're doing the read option, obviously, with Cade McNamara, but at some point when he gives 99% of the time, that's not a thing anymore, right? And so it's just a run up the gut. And so I think that where some teams in the past 3 games, because they hadn't seen Michigan's offense yet, they had to cover the quarterback on the read option. Now Rutgers sold out completely to the running back. Cade still gives. Well, there's 3 guys in the hole then that can meet him there.
Justin, when we look at the defense, I don't know that there's really much to be concerned with there. They had 1 long field goal drive in the first half, and that was it. Then in the second half, they did have 3 productive drives in a row, meaning the touchdown, the field goal, the missed field goal after a 60-yard drive. So they did move the ball for 3 consecutive drives pretty effectively, but nothing too explosive. And then the Wolverines put the clamps on it after that. And you can't expect a defense to hold a team to 3 points for an entire football game.
Yeah, I think Josh Gaddis better buy Mike McDonald a nice steak dinner after Saturday, because he saved his ass, quite honestly. This defense kept them in the ball game all day. You only gave up 13 points to a team that scored 70, just a couple weeks ago. And I don't care who you play. If you can score 70 points, that means you can move the ball. Noah Vedral has been pretty solid, and he did it again on Saturday. And so he's dynamic. They ran that read option, and Noah Vedral kept it quite often and was okay. But I thought that Saturday's performance by this defense was about as descriptive of a bend but don't break defense as you can get. They let some things happen, but by the time Rutgers got into the red zone, that's when they put the clamps on and they held them to a field goal. One of them even they missed, that type of thing. They ran a really, really good play call for that touchdown pass where it was an RPO. The linebacker bit on the running back, and then he had another RB streaking down the field. But I think that when you're looking at what happened throughout this game, they put the clamps on him in the first half. Everything was going well. Then Michigan goes 3 and out, 4 straight drives. That defense is on the field constantly. Chris Hitton is 300-some pounds and played 53 snaps. Guess what? At some point, you're going to get shoved around if you have your guys on the field for that long. And so I don't want to put this blame on the defense at all, because they did save it by the end of it. And so I thought the other part of that is Josh Ross in the fourth quarter was out with a stinger. You have Junior Colson, who's a freshman linebacker. You have Nakai Hill-Green, who's a redshirt freshman, I believe. I think they're both redshirt freshmen, if I'm correct there. But you have 2 very young linebackers that are leading your defense there. Josh Ross is a 5th-year senior that doesn't, he comes out of the game. That's your quarterback of the defense, right? And so those were to be expected of things that were going on in the fourth quarter there. But I thought this defense did fantastic, honestly.
Yeah, you beat me to the punch there, because to give further context to it, yes, they gave up 3 consecutive would-be scoring drives. The third one was a missed field goal, but preceding all those drives, 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, with 0, -1, 7, and 5 yards gained. Like 5 yards gained over the course of 4 drives. That's a pretty long stretch of the football game with the inability to do anything.
Yeah, and then, I mean, you have to think about the mental part of that too. Your defense, your offense is getting beat down. Your defense is now has to come back on the field every 5 minutes, essentially. And it's like, oh my God, we got to keep doing this. We got to keep doing this. And now all of a sudden, they keep, Rutgers has some really good plays. They start racking them up. And then all of a sudden it's like, crap, this is a game and we've got to figure it out. So totally. I think that, I think they ended up, this defense played really well. This defense is by far, I think, the strength of this football team all in all. The offense shows some shine and some spurts of greatness. But when you look at, the 4 games in total, this defense has stepped up in pretty much every single one of those 4 games.
Folks, please like the video, share the video out on social media, and subscribe right here at the Voice of College Football. We got Justin Rowe on the line as we do each and every week from Blue by 90 podcast. Check out his podcast right there covering Michigan football. Good stuff. You get an extension, obviously, of what you get here and a whole lot more. All right, looking ahead to Wisconsin, we mentioned off the top, it's understandable why Wisconsin would be a favorite or it would be a pick'em game. Regardless of the records, throughout the records, yeah, Wisconsin played Penn State, they played Notre Dame, they played two roughly top 10 teams in the nation, and it didn't go well in the fourth quarter against Notre Dame. 6 sacks, 12 tackles for loss, giving up about 280 yards of total offense isn't necessarily a team that usually loses 41-13 that gives up 41 points. The defense did not give up 41 points. 2 pick sixes in the last 2.5 minutes of the game. A 96-yard kickoff return on the special teams, repeatedly having to play in their own red zone because Graham Mertz threw 4 picks. I watched this game until it got out of hand with about 5 minutes left. It was not a 41-13 game. It was a slugfest between two really good teams that hit and have elite defenses, but one of them just took care of the football.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people that are going to look at this matchup. All right, 4-0 Michigan, who has beat everybody, pretty handily except for that second half last week, and then a 1-2 Wisconsin, who got their rocks kicked off the last week. But this is going to be a close matchup for sure. Michigan's offense is not going to be able to do whatever they want on Saturday against Wisconsin's defense. I think that defense is still a top 15, top 10 maybe defense in the country. They're very, very good. And you can't expect to have the turnovers and the kick returns. That doesn't happen, often. And so even if Graham Mertz doesn't play well, to expect, pick sixes and 96-yard kick returns would be crazy. So I think this is going to be a very, very close game. I think what Michigan's going to have to do is this defense is going to have to take advantage of Graham Mertz's mistakes. They're going to have to send Aiden Hutchinson and some of these linebackers after Mertz, get him uncomfortable, all that stuff. Don't let him get in a rhythm because the weird thing is for this Wisconsin offense, I can't remember what it was, but they passed it a lot more than they did running the ball, which I would love to know the stat of how many times over the past 15, 20 years that Wisconsin has thrown the ball more than they've run it. But they don't have that Jonathan Taylor guy anymore. They don't have a Heisman-type running back. And so they have to utilize Graham Mertz. And for whatever reason, Graham Mertz early 2020 was incredible. He was on a roll. That guy is no longer at the helm of Wisconsin. And so it's going to be interesting to see what Michigan does on the defensive side to get Graham Mertz uncomfortable. But I could see this being a pretty low-scoring game, if I'm being honest.
Notre Dame churns out as many NFL offensive linemen as anyone. So their offensive line isn't quite as good as it's typically been, but it's still, I'm sure these guys are going to develop into really good players. They're having some issues up front. So it's partially Notre Dame, but it's also Wisconsin. Kyron Williams is a top 10 running back in the nation, 18 carries, 33 yards against Wisconsin, 1.8 per carry. They gained 9 yards rushing. And then you would think, okay, well, they threw for 350. They threw for 239, 6.5 yards per attempt. They were okay through the air, nothing phenomenal. So again, I watched this game and Wisconsin they turned the ball over and had a special teams gaffe is what they did. They threw at 41. They ran at 29. Ches Malusi, 18 carries, 54 yards. He's a transfer in from Clemson. He's a good back. He was highly recruited, but they don't have Jonathan Taylor, let alone like waves of running backs like they did 10 years ago, James White and Monte Ball, and like 3 of them back there. They are missing that, and they got to figure some things out on offense because, the Graham Mertz slump is pretty extended at this point. It's like a 7 or 8 game slump at this point.
Yeah, but I think you have to take into effect, what you just said about Notre Dame, and then their 2 losses are to Penn State, who's now ranked 4th in the country, and Notre Dame, I think, did they sneak into the top 10? I can't remember. Maybe they're 12 or something like that. But those are not, bad football teams, obviously. So their 2 losses are to very good football teams. Now, and so you have it them being, and that Penn State game was very, very close. They've, until the turnovers, until the kick return, this was a very close game as well. And so they've played with really good football teams. So I don't want to take away from what Wisconsin could do in this game against Michigan. You know, I think if they play a clean game, don't make mistakes, things like that, this could actually go in Wisconsin's favor pretty heavily. Now on the other side, Michigan is still without a turnover on the year, so they don't make mistakes either. So it might come down to neither team is really moving the ball. It's a defensive battle, but one team ends up, with a fumble or with a pick six or something that ends up deciding this game. But, I think that it's kind of funny that we're looking at these two teams where Wisconsin doesn't have those they've never had those star guys except for at the running back position, right? But Michigan doesn't have now star guys except for at the running back position either on the offensive side. And so it's going to be who comes out and has their career day, I think, is going to be how this game pans out.
And as Michigan fans are aware, these two teams have been trading haymakers home and home pretty much until last season, and Wisconsin broke the trend coming to Ann Arbor 49-11. But besides that, there have been some rough trips to Camp Randall. But of course, Michigan has held their own in the Big House going back to 2015.